Hello, welcome. Hello, everybody. My name's David Berthold, and I'm the Director of the Centre of Creative Practices here at NIDA. This afternoon, I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. And of course, those elders and their families have, through incomprehensible resilience, have made this land a place of culture and creative expression for about 3,000 generations now. So that's quite remarkable. My very special guest today is Robyn Nevin. Hello, Robyn.
Hi, David.
Hi. Congratulations first on your very recent award, Order of Australia, just 6 weeks old now.
Well,
yeah, I think it was about 6 weeks ago.
Sorry?
Yeah, about 6 weeks ago. And it was a reminder when I heard that, although no reminder is really needed, of how much you've been part of the growth of Australian theatre in particular. Over the last 60 years as actor and then director, and then of course as artistic director of two large theatre companies, Queensland Theatre and Sydney Theatre Company. I was also reminded too, when I saw you got that new award, that many of those who were maybe just 5 or 10 years older than you, like people like Germaine Greer and Robert Hughes and Barrie Humphries, felt it necessary to leave Australia to make their mark, but you didn't. Was that a conscious decision for you, not to leave?
I was offered an opportunity when I was in my final year at school to audition for NIDA, and I was 16, and I'd had a very strong sense of that being a way, a possible way forward, although I don't know what I was thinking of, because it really wasn't then. But the NIDA prospectus landed at school, and I did the audition, and I was accepted, and I went to NIDA in 1959 in the very first group, 1959-60, and it was a very bleak time in terms of theatre there, and there was no Australian theatre really. It was all imported, and most of the actors, the older actors, were pretty cynical, and most of them had quite English accents. We did a production when I was at NIDA of Julius Caesar, which we did with the Australian Elizabethan Theatre Trust at the old theatre in Newtown, which is burnt down long ago. And all of the actors in that production were very cynical about NIDA. They considered us products of a finishing school, this new sort of glamorous entry into theatre, which was for spoiled young rich kids, which absolutely was not the case. I was 17, and the oldest person, I think, in the class was about 42. We were a very disparate group, and I think there were about 40 of us, actually. I think that's right. There were a lot. So, and there was no clear path. There were very, very few possibilities. So why I imagined I could magically become an actress, I don't know. It was instinct, it was passion, determination, and I had a gift. I could do it. I mean, in my limited, very youthful way, I believed that I could do it. And that was really because of the encouragement of a particular teacher at school who was one of the headmistresses. She was the senior English teacher, and her passion each year was to do the school play, and she chose me each year, and that's how I developed. And she convinced me that it was worth doing, and she convinced me that it was a very serious endeavour.
Right. So she found out that this new drama school had been created in Sydney.
She was a very interesting woman. The two women who ran the school had begun this particular school for girls. They were very liberal, independent minded women from another era, but they believed in education for girls. So they saw this as a very significant step forward for me. And yeah, I think prospectus is prospecti. What's the plural of prospectus? I think they landed, you know, in principals' offices everywhere, I assume. But I was blessed that I just coincided with that. You know, that was a confluence of happy circumstances. I was blessed.
I've heard you talk a few times about your first performance, which was in Hobart at the Theatre Royal, and you've often talk about that that performance as Snow White when you're about 14. But the thing that's interesting for me when I've heard you talk about that is that you really describe it as a true epiphany about being an actor.
Well, it was such a surprise to be chosen. I didn't. We used to read aloud in our English lessons in those days. We would take turns to read from largely Dickens. I think it was Dickens at the time. And I was a good reader because I'd read voraciously since I was a child. I used to read with the torch under the bedclothes, you know, when it was forbidden. So I lived in imaginative worlds, I think, most of the time. So I was a good reader, and I also had long dark hair, and I was quite pretty. So I was a Snow White, wasn't I? Yeah. But she took it very seriously, and I think I was imbued with that sense of the seriousness of the activity from that very early age, from about 11, by this woman. Right. The other thing I wanted to say about staying in Australia was that Patrick White said to me, paint your own landscape. Now, and it was at a time when everybody was leaving, and he believed fervently that Australians should stay and create art out of their own sense of meaning and sense of their own landscape, you know, metaphorically. So he didn't talk me into staying, but I mean, that was an impact, that was an influence as well.
And yeah, sorry, I've heard you speak about that too, and you're saying that comment from Patrick White that you should paint your own landscape really seared into your consciousness and kind of remained with you. And I suppose that around that time, you were also around some really prominent artists who were similarly determined to paint their own landscape. I guess I'm thinking particularly of Jim Sharman, you know, who very early in his life could have had a great international career, you know, the co-creator of Rocky Horror and, you know, the first production of Jesus Christ Superstar on the West End in London. Like, he was feted in London and quite surprisingly came back to Australia to do exactly as you said, to paint his own landscape through Patrick White and through working with you and so on. So I felt like while there was some people who were 5 or 10 years older than you and Jim, there were others, you know, like you and Jim, who quite consciously chose to stay and to build something really quite significant. Yeah,
well, Jim came out of such a specific and very particular, such a singular tradition, which, you know, from his, you know, his father's boxing troupe in the Easter show. I mean, I don't know how you could, yeah, I don't know. Yes, yes. Yeah, I know. Well, but I think in terms of the actors, NIDA began something for us. And although I gave the theatre up with a grand flourish for a while and went into television because there was so little happening. And I was I was completely separated from the theatre for a time, during which there was that early development of Australian theatre. But then when I came back to it, I was fully engaged, and I was again terribly fortunate to be in that mainstream of activity, because then, as opposed to now, there was not much activity outside of mainstream theatre. So, I mean, there was amateur theatre, but I was a terrible snob about amateur theatre. I didn't understand the value of it then. I thought, I'm trained as a professional, this is how I make my money, it's my career, I'm an actress. I don't do it as a hobby. It's not a hobby. It's a serious profession. Somehow I've always believed, well, not somehow, but I've always believed in the value of what we do as practitioners of this particular art form, reflecting us back at ourselves, humanity back at humanity, the mirror held up to nature. I just believe it's a really serious contribution that we make. Yeah, I've been stuck with that.
Yeah, I've heard you quote David Hare on that subject too. And David Hare, the playwright, says there were, there are three disciplines, I think he says, to which people go for help in understanding, the human predicament. They go to science, they go to religion, and they go to art. So I guess within that, he's suggesting, as you're saying, that art is kind of useful in a sense. And you've been very passionate advocate of the place of arts and culture in a society and in human living, and spoken a lot about Australia's ambivalent attitude to artists, I guess, more generally. Is that something that still occupies your mind a lot?
Well, I've spent a lot of time arguing for funding for governments. I've spent a lot of time arguing for governments to validate what we do, to recognise what we do, not just by allocating funds, but by actually being out there in the marketplace, buying art and being seen, to attending arts events, and generally giving voice to the essential characteristics of what it is that we do and what we give to society, how we contribute, and how special and significant and fundamental that is to a civilized society. So it's not just money, it's acknowledgement and validating in all manner of ways. There have been very few leaders in Australia who've ignored the fact that there may not be a lot of votes in the arts, and have been true to themselves and their own belief in the value. So it's an ongoing argument, yeah. In fact, I wrote a letter recently to the newspaper, which wasn't published. I think I went a little bit too far. It was in response to the word arts being dropped from the ministry. So it's the Ministry for Transport and something, and we're in there. And the arts minister is called the arts minister, and I received a very nice letter from him recently acknowledging my new honour. But I thought dropping the word arts was a deeply worrying event, and I responded to it quite strong language, and it wasn't published. So that was a shame.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you talk about Subsidy, and I guess your career in particular, particularly in the theatre, has been very much a product, not only of your own talent and hard work, but also of a subsidised art sector, theatre sector, in the way you've grown up in the theatre. But it's funny in Australia that so many sectors of our society are subsidised: education, health, mining. The banks are subsidised. Almost everywhere you look, there's subsidy. But when you talk about subsidy in the arts, somehow it's somehow it's not acceptable. Somehow.
That's a really interesting context. I've never actually heard anyone say that before. I mean, I've always been aware of subsidy for farmers and for sports and so on, but of course, it's much broader than that, and that makes it, and that gives the argument a special kind of glimmer, I think, if you can put it in that context, because then a lot, it brings a clarity to and helps people to understand, which is, communication. I mean, communication is just the most powerful tool anyone has. That's what we are. We're communicators, but politicians are also communicators. And yes, I mean, I've always found it really difficult having to justify to politicians what it is that we do and why it should be supported and funded. I come from a time when the arts were allowed to fail. I mean, I don't mean that failure was anticipated or expected or, easily handled or managed or dealt with or regarded, but it was understood that Subsidy was there to support productions of works that may not be wildly and broadly popular, but that they would contribute in some meaningful way. And so they should be produced, the classics, new works, etc. So the argument goes on. I think it's an eternal one. Although, of course, in other cultures, where Barrie Kosky currently sits, for example, we had, when I was at the running Sydney Theatre Company, we had a marvelous sponsor. He was the head of Audi. And when I created the Actors Company at the Sydney Theatre Company, and he was as a sponsor, he made the speech on the opening night, and he made this radiant speech about, yes, of course you have an ensemble. Of course that's what theatre, he was German. Of course that's what theatre companies do, the ensemble. But of course, we all have them in Germany. And, I wept tears of joy. I just loved that man, because to him it was part of a civilized city life. And he was proud and happy to be giving money to the ensemble as the head of Audi cars. It was great. It was really...
Yeah. It's probably worth talking a little bit about the Actors Company, because it was one of your great acts of persuasion, I think, when you, of a politician, when you were at Sydney Theatre Company as artistic director and convinced Bob Carr, who was then the Premier and Minister for Arts, to give special funding to a company of, was it 12 actors, I think, was it about?
Yes. Yeah.
12 actors who were, formed a company at STC who were on full-time salary and working together on all manner of work. So what was important for you about that? You spent so much time advocating for it and successfly getting it.
Well, it was partly my own experience and background. I'd been part of the Old Tote Theatre Company, which is where the NIDA Parade Theatre now sits. And in that old Parade Theatre that once was on that site, we used to, I was part of an ensemble group, and we did production after production after production. And they were the really formative years where I learned more through constant practice, and the challenge of a wide range of different roles and different directors to some extent, yeah. And being part of it's like an ensemble, it's like a musical ensemble. You just learn, you learn the shorthand, you learn how to work as a team, and you become stronger and more confident, and the craft, you develop your craft, you practice. Ariane Manouchkin said, keep your tools sharp. Well, the tools are, you are your own source of tools. There is only you as an actor. All you have is your body, your brain with your body. And that is the finest way to keep your tools sharpened, is practice. And it was a great privilege. And then I was with also Inrex Cramphorn's little ensemble group too, working over long periods of time, evolving great classic plays, translating them, working on them, breaking them down, turning them into the kind of production that he used to make over months at a time. And those were the most rewarding experiences in the sense of developing my craft, developing skills, and learning how to be brave. So that's what I wanted to introduce. I wanted to give that possibility to other actors. And I thought that the Sydney Theatre Company, as a very well-resourced company, had that responsibility to do. I suppose my emphasis as an artistic director in the company was on, was as I'd been an actor first and foremost, that was where my profoundest interest lay, my most profound interest lay, I suppose, although what I really did love too was encouraging young artists from, across the board, directors, designers, so but it was something that I knew about from deep experience, and I wanted to, yes, introduce that into the company. Bob Carr had always been a supporter of mine from the time I was appointed at STC. So he was always on side, you know, he was always interested in what we did. He came to see everything. He was very critical, very positive and very critical, which is always great. You get both, you know. He was engaged. So, and I did go along and argue. I developed this huge argument, and I learnt it like I'd learn a monologue, and I delivered it, and it was listened to, and so it was it happened. One of the problems was that I was so totally absorbed by running the company. We were doing about 19 productions a year across the board. And I was acting in some of them and directing in some of them. And I was just so completely absorbed by that I couldn't realize one of my strong desires, which was to be part of the company.
Right.
And that did create a problem because I became removed from it. And I would love to have been in there as a stronger influence and a kind of, you know, parental influence, really. Because I think so much about directing and producing is about parenting.
That Actors Company produced some really clear triumphs. You know, I guess you immediately think of Benedict Andrews' production of Season at Sarsaparilla and Barrie Kosky's Lost Echo, I think most remarkably in a way, that 8-hour production, which remains one of the kind of great theatre experiences of my life. But I guess the Actors Company, was it 3 years it existed in that form?
Well, I gave them an extension of the contract into 6 years, but then I had to leave. So sadly, I had to leave. Well, I didn't have to leave, but I chose to leave. I think the word is spent.
Well, I'm not surprised, as you were saying. Yeah, I can imagine, you know, the kind of life of the Actors Company would have been very different if you had been able, you know, to be part of it as an actor, you know, but.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it would have been different, and it was or as director, like just being inside it, but it's just not possible, as you would know, David. It's just not possible to take the time out of running a huge company to isolate into a select, I mean, a discrete unit like that, which it kind of was, but. And there were difficulties within the company as well, a few personalities that didn't fit from the start. But I think its achievements were quite extraordinary, and I remain immensely proud of that particular achievement. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about the craft of acting. It would be remiss of me not to kind of have a bit of a conversation with you about your principal craft. And it strikes me that you, probably more than most other actors I know, are not afraid to be ugly on stage. In other words, you don't attempt to smooth over the edges of what might be an ugly character. But you don't care what people think of your character, and I guess through that, I guess has that been a crucial part of your craft as an actor?
I would say absolutely yes, because I mean it's to do with not judging the character. It's to do with being as true as one can determine and understand through exploring the text and being with the other actors and directors and so on. The intentions the intentions of the character. So, and not judge them, but to try to determine, you know, a step at a time. Like, for instance, in this film I've just done, Relic, I played a woman with dementia, with Alzheimer's, and I have no experience of Alzheimer's. And I couldn't research it because the Alzheimer's was very particular to that woman. The woman who wrote it also directed it, and she had a very clear understanding of what she wanted. Because I knew that she knew, I just did what the script said. action by action by action. I didn't question, I didn't try to analyze, I just did it. And I think that's a kind of a key in a way, because Chekhov is the hardest for me. As an actress, I think Chekhov is the most difficult, because there seem to be so many options. Interestingly, if you just do the action without worrying or overthinking it, which is a common thing with actors, if you just do the action over the process of rehearsing, I think it becomes clear through the circumstances surrounding you what the intention is, or yes, in Chekhov's mind. So, and it's like I had this technique as a director, because I completely comprehend how difficult it is to suddenly be intimate and close and loving with somebody you've never met before within 2 weeks or a week of something of rehearsal. All of that is, well, it's particularly fraught now, but it's very difficult on just a simple human level. So when I've been in plays where a woman has to say to a man, I love you, or the reverse, or something like that, I've said, just say the word, just say the words as if in capitals. Don't give it anything, just I love you. Or you can say, now I say, I want to be with you for the rest of my life. And wait until the rest of the stuff around you, the rest of the role, the scene, the entire play, whatever it is, begins to fill and inform that moment. And then eventually that moment will be filled and will be full. And it's a kind of it's a sort of, I don't know, what is it? It's a sort of what kind of approach is that? I don't even know how you describe it, but it's practical, and it's not worrying away at your personal, worry about what is this moment about. Just do it.
Yeah, totally. And how do you introduce the idea of style into that? Because I think you're also a great stylist. You have a fantastic understanding of style. And I guess when I think of something like your performance in Patrick White's Cheery, for example, which you had 2 stabs at, that's a play of very high style. So I guess from an acting point of view, that's more than about playing an intention. It's something but something else as well. Do you think about style very much?
Tone is everything. Tone, rhythm. So crucial, because, and I'm always asking about tone. I'm always asking about tone if I'm in something. And yeah, I think instinct plays plays into this. I've been doing it for a long time, but I think with that Cheery Soul, that first, I know it was so interesting. First time I did it with Jim Sharman, I kind of leapt into it. I had an idea of the outline of her shape, her body. I think I read somewhere in a Patrick short story that she had a body like a bag of potatoes or something. And we had a body shape made that I climbed into. And that was, knowing I had an outline was very important. So I presented to the audience, and the costume design too, which was Brian Thompson, was fabulous. And then later on, Dale Ferguson's brilliant costume design for the second production I did with Neil Armfield. But an external shape for a character like that who is not naturalistic. And because I was about 35 when I was playing her originally, and she was, 55 or something, I'm not sure. But that outline gave me a strong sense of it's not cartoon, that's too cheap a word but because the character I thought was hollow inside, unloved, just empty, but she had this bulbous kind of shape. So it gave me an idea about her laughter, which came from a hollow space, and the way she walked, which was hunched and forward looking, flat-footed, because she had that shape, and she was always purposeful, so she was always moving forward. It's very technical. So I am very technical. There's a wonderful expression, and I can't remember, you would know this. and I keep forgetting who said it. It's something about creating the shape that contains the mess, and the shape is form, and the mess is the.
Samuel Beckett talks about that.
That's it. Thank you, it's Beckett. Yeah, that's exactly the quote. Well, I understand that completely. I know exactly what he's talking about. So you fill all that, you've got, the technique is so important because that's what you present in a definitive way, but inside that is the complexity of the stuff of life and the mess of emotions and all of that, but they have to be shaped to match, to fit with a script.
Yeah. And in that first production, Cheery Soul, with Jim Sharman directed, Jim talks about the character as being, I think, King Lear and Clown Face. So it's a monumental role, right in the center of that vast play, but also a clown. So I guess when you're talking about the exterior or something, or you're talking about her, Miss Docker's, which is the character, this great laugh, I guess clowning became a really important part, I suppose.
And I took that from, my clowning goes back to a production I did with John Bell at NIDA, rehearsing in at James Street, called The Legend of King O'Malley. And that's in the early 70s, I think. Yeah. We did a clown workshop. Well, I couldn't have been less inhibited. I could not have welcomed that less. I was so awkward. I just didn't know what to do. And he had us running around the room. And there was a box of, there was a box of props and costumes and stuff. And I was just incredibly awkward. I just didn't know what to do. Now that was a prelude to this production. It was a kind of little workshop he had. I don't know what I absorbed from that. I was so awkward. I didn't think I absorbed anything, but maybe I did. But in that production, I played a politician, and they were all clown figures. It was mocking Parliament. So I was a little parliamentarian, and I found vaudeville, just straight out of vaudeville. What did I know about vaudeville? I don't know. I must have absorbed it from somewhere. But I found a little vaudevillian chap, and that chap has served me well, because a lot of that chap went into Miss Docker. A lot of that chap went into a production I did of The Good Woman of Setswan. I played Mrs. Shin, and I drew on that, whatever that, who's it? Is it Neil Armfield that says everybody's got their inner clown? I don't know, one of those directors says something like that. Well, I guess that's my little chap. And he pops out in all sorts of ways, and he's been very useful over the years. But it's a source, and I can't fully explain it. But certainly, I remember starting rehearsals with Jim for A Cheery Soul, and I had a red practice. I had a practice overcoat, and I think a little hat on my hair, and I just went straight into that. I went straight to that little chap, and it just evolved. I can't explain more than that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say little chap. You've actually played a few roles in theatre which are nominally male roles, like Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, King Lear, in a production called Queen Lear, and I guess even the Fool in King Lear and another production. So when, maybe others, but when you were inhabiting those nominally male roles, did you notice any difference in the way those roles were built, as opposed to a Cleopatra or a Lady Macbeth?
Oh yes, well, with great difficulty, because I always start off saying I've got no idea how to do a man. All I know is there's that they stand with their legs spread wide apart. That's all I kind of can bring to it. I don't know. It's always, but I do tend to be like that whenever with any role that I'm approaching. I start off by saying I'm too short, or I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I'm too grey, or I'm too dark, or I'm just wrong. I'm not right for this. So it's a struggle. I struggle to overcome all of those, the naysayers in my head. That just seems to be part of the process. I don't know why. But the men, yeah, I find it so difficult. With The Fool that I did in the recent Lear that Neil directed with Geoffrey Rush, I was really reluctant. I just kept saying, Neil didn't want me to use a kind of male voice. And I said, well, I just have to. Oh, that's my phone. Can we just ignore it? Can we tolerate that in the background? He didn't want me to use a male voice. I don't know why, but I was just unable to, I was not convincing to myself if I was talking in my own voice. And I've got a thing about voices. I've got this sort of conviction that if I work on a vocal thing for a role, I end up with some kind of result at the end of that work. You know, in the production, I've got a voice that belongs to the character. It may be that my husband could come to that show and say, oh, that's the same voice I've heard in every production you've done. But I think it's different because I put it through a process. So I've got a big thing about vocal, about making us, about sounds that come out of your body, because it's so fundamental to breathing, to absolutely everything. And in this one, it was fundamental to me that I kind of find a way of me thinking I sounded like a man, just me. And Neil eventually, you know, let me go, and I kind of did it, but with such a degree of awkwardness and reluctance, it was very, very hard. What helped me was Alice Babbage's costume. She first put me in something and I just went, oh, that's just fantastic. So we worked on it together, and then I asked for a bit of a tummy, and I asked for some genitals, which I was given, and so we built it. Alice and I built that character together with a little hat and this fabulous wig I had, which was a bald wig. And then I put on, the makeup was absolutely no makeup, and I drew eyebrows. I'd take forever doing these tiny little feathery eyebrows that kind of went from there to here, because men's do and women's don't. And that was kind of all I did, really. But building it was very different from, yes, of course, from a woman. I mean, Cleopatra, God, yes. I was very uncomfortable with her because she's such a kind of symbol of sensuality and sexuality, none of which I, you know, can see in myself. So they're all fraught with barriers, all of them.
Mm. Can you, you know, I guess almost 60 years now as a working actor, and I just want to ask you if you've seen many changes in the way what good acting is thought of. And I suppose when you think about the history of acting, each generation thinks of itself as being more realistic than those that come before. And weirdly, it's always the word realistic that kind of crops up. You know, even, you know, Richard Burbage, who, you know, the first actor in Shakespeare's company to play Hamlet and King Lear and so on, he was thought of as being a new kind of realistic actor. And I guess David Garrick in the 18th century, the same. You know, he was famous for getting rid of the bombastic style, and it was a new kind of realism. I guess in the 20th century, Laurence Olivier, the same. You know, both praised and criticized for a new kind of realism, which some said at the time made him a kind of bad verse speaker. But now we wouldn't think of any of those actors as being kind of realistic in any kind of common way to think about that word. Have you seen many changes in approach to acting over those 50, 60 years?
Yeah, I think television's been an enormous influence on acting. Realistic. That's interesting listening to you talk about it, because I haven't really, you know, put it into context like that. But I had naturalistic acting. In fact, my very first review said, lost in Robyn Nevin's naturalistic acting, It's my first review for A Taste of Honey at the Palace Theatre, now torn down. I think it's really important. I think stage training is so important to all actors because because it requires you to work with the high language scripts, which texts which demand that you reach up to them, whereas contemporary television, is just the way we all speak at home to each other. And so I think that discipline, and I hope it's still rigorously, applied at NIDA, of learning how to deal with language, learning how the different stylists, as you were talking about before, Restoration, Jacobean, Shakespearean, Noel Coward, so on, Tennessee Williams, they're all, they have different demands. And I think it's very, very important for actors to learn about those different demands, different disciplines and requirements. Anybody can talk like I'm talking now. It's not difficult. So, and with a bit of judicious editing in the editing room, you can be made to look pretty good. But you can't, so it's the transferring from screen to stage, if you've had no stage training, is much more difficult than what I've just recently done, which is transferring from stage to screen. I just think that the disciplines of those language demands are really, really important and very helpful, and they develop you vocally too as well. So I would say, just in terms of that question you're answering, that there is that there is a greater emphasis on realistic, if you like, what I call TV naturalism, than on the more formal. And I just think it's important to be educated in the formalities so that you can go to them when you need them.
Yeah, that's a fascinating conversation about crafts. I'll be able to open it up to some questions, maybe from staff or students in a moment. But before I do, I just wanted to talk about, you were talking about the instruments you have as an actor, your voice and body and so on. And I know the practice of Feldenkrais is very important to you. I think you're the patron even of the Australian Feldenkrais Guild. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know it's really important to you to maintain your body.
I'm thrilled that you brought this up. I'm just thrilled. I think it's terribly important to actors. When I'm asked for advice, I always say health. Health is number one. Mental, physical, emotional health. Your physicality, your physical health is just absolutely crucial, because you have to have management of your body. You have to be able to, demand of your body whatever the requirements of the character or the play or the production may be. And stamina is so important. In filming, stamina is so important. And in theatre, of course, 8 shows a week, wish it was 7, if only. Terribly important. So health for me is number one. I'm a bore about that. And part of maintaining your physical health is through exercise. But Feldenkrais for me was an absolute revelation. I didn't know about it until I had a shoulder issue, and I was in the middle of a tour, and the shoulder issue caused a complete physical breakdown. I know it sounds impossible, but dealing with pain over many, many months, to the point where I couldn't lift a wine glass, which was a prop in a David Williamson play. I couldn't lift it because I had weakness and pain. So I had to drop out of the production for 10 weeks, the Sydney Theatre Company. I went to a physiotherapist who sent me to a Feldenkrais practitioner. And I remember the first treatment I had, and I thought, oh, there's nothing, nothing's happening. I can't feel anything. There's nothing happening. I was getting very tense. And then I walked out and I kind of went, oh, this is extraordinary. What's happened? I didn't. So it's very powerful and very gentle all at once. And it realigns the spine. It's all about spine realignment, teaching you, and it teaches you. Each Feldenkrais session is a lesson about where you're holding tension. And of course, in my case, it was up here, which is pretty classic and pretty common and pretty uninteresting, like that. Very forward moving, sense of purpose, but shielding this vulnerable part here. So it was all hunched forward. And eventually that led to extreme tension and blah, blah. And this process of releasing took years. In fact, I remember one person saying, a physiotherapist saying, you will never be able to lift your arm higher than that. Well, now I can do anything. I can do anything. It's all thanks to Feldenkrais. I think it's extraordinary. I still go.
Yeah.
I maintain those sessions because they remind me of where I'm holding tension and they relax tension. So it just means that it gives you an ease of movement and control over your body, which you need as an actor, so you can determine which way you will use it. When I was doing a play called Neighborhood Watch, I played at Belvoir, a Lally Katz play, and I was playing an old, Simon Stone directed, I was playing an old, I'm nearly 80 myself. This was about 8 years ago or something like that, and she was 80. So I developed some kind of physicality that denoted age, and it was pretty tough on my body. And the Feldenkrais practitioner, Rochelle Franks, who's a healer beyond, she gave me these exercises to do the minute I came off stage, which were in opposition to what the shapes that my body had been making, to get me through and to get my, so it's brilliant for actors as an ongoing means of managing your physicality and being healthy and easy in your movement. And it also gives you individual guidance for a particular production you may be doing.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm glad you spoke about that. So I've always been aware that you've been so conscious about your own health. Your instrument, your body, your voice, your general well-being, is really crucial to you. What about vocally? Are there any particular things that you are careful about in your vocal instrument in terms of taking care of it over the years?
No, and in fact, it's really out of practice now. I can hear it now. It's thin and uninteresting, but that's because I haven't worked on stage in such a long time, and also because, but I am going back into. So I'm doing a play next year, which I'm preparing for now, which is a one-woman piece, which I can't talk about because it hasn't been announced. But I've said that much. But the reason I mention it is because I'm going to start singing, and that's just a discipline for getting me back to. I've got this range of exercises from humming, then through doing various sounds, but you have to do it every day. I also believe in screaming too. I think screaming on a beach is pretty good, but it's practice. Again, it's practice. But once I get into serious preparation for this thing next year, I will go back into that daily thing, only 10 minutes each day to start with, and then singing all the time and humming all the time. Because one of the difficulties is microphones. You still need to use energy from microphones, and you still need that vocal richness, of course. But if you work with microphones all the time, it's just not the same as full projection in a big house. But I guess those days have gone. Yeah.
I think Olivier was a big screamer too. He used to do a lot of screaming on beaches. Yeah, he did it quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's good. I think it's great. Well, it's projection, isn't it? Oh, I suddenly shouted. Sorry.
Here's a question, which is what role that you've played has taught you the most about acting? It's an interesting question, actually. Yeah.
It's a very difficult question to answer. I would say two. I would say Hecuba in the Women of Troy, which is a play that Barrie Kosky directed at the Sydney Theatre Company. That one, and the other one would be, I would say, Cleopatra in Antony and Cleopatra. And it's so long ago I did that. but I remember the demands of that. And that in that instance, it was because of Shakespeare, because it was Shakespeare. So it requires this, you know, as I said before, you reaching up to the scale of the ideas and the language and filling them, which can be enormously difficult for, you know, kind of just an ordinary person to do, because he didn't write ordinary people, you know, he wrote extraordinary, very theatrical characters. So you have to kind of be big enough to fill that. So it was about language and ideas and physicality. And in Barrie's production of The Women of Troy, he had 3 hours of music to start every day. So I had to learn these incredibly difficult songs by John Dowland and Mozart and Schubert, and I had to learn them, and I'm not a singer, but the discipline of that, of learning that, combined with the discipline of, for example, standing still for a long, long time in a position of pain, those sort of disciplines reminded me of how disciplined you have to be as an actor. You have to have, your body has to be in great, you know, has to be toned. I don't mean gym toned. I mean healthy and strong, healthy, well fed and well watered. And your mind has to be ready. The readiness is all. And I think learning new disciplines, like learning choreography, which I've had to do for musicals, so hard for me to do because I've had no experience. But setting challenges for the brain, it's just all about discipline and health.
Good. And a last question is actually about musicals. And weirdly enough, because, and I think this is true to say, you do like a good musical. You know, I think I've read interviews with you. I've read interviews with you with that, you know, you kind of, in a way, you kind of grew up on, you know, like many people, you know, with American show tunes and so on. And you've dabbled a little bit in musicals in your life, directed one with Summer Rain, Nick Enright and Terence Clark's musical, and a run with My Fair Lady, of course, that Julie Andrews directed for Opera Australia. So do you like a good musical?
Oh, I just love musicals. Almost, I mean, if I could have my wish, if I could start all over again, I'd like to be either a painter, or I'd like to be able to sing, like really have command of, just be given the gift of a great voice. I actually was cast as Scarlett O'Hara in the musical version of Gone with the Wind in 1970 something or other by Joe Layton's this Broadway director who came out and auditioned 7 times, and I got the part, I was cast, and then the production was cancelled mercifully because I think it was a terrible production, really bad, but great theatre story. And I think if that had happened, my career would have gone quite differently, because he was going to take me to New York and extend my range. How about that? I also did a production of Oklahoma last year for the production company, which was very brief. You know, they work under terrible conditions there because it's no time and no money, but a lot of enthusiasm, same old story. And there's a wonderful director called Christopher Parker who directed that. And I played Aunt Ella, and I absolutely adored it. I was completely happy. You see, the thing is, David, I've spent most of my life playing sad women or tragic women or angry women or tough women. And being in a musical, there is, you know, the joyous ones are absolutely filled with joy and great gifts, because everybody has to be able to sing really well and dance really well. So you're not surrounded by, you know, lower forms of life. They all have to reach the level required. And yeah, absolute source of huge joy for me.
Wow. Well, I hope you get many more musicals.
Thanks.
All right. That's all we have time for, Robyn. An enormous pleasure to talk with you, and really only scraping the surface, but what we've done, I think, will give a lot of students and a lot of folk a lot of joy to hear you talk about all those things so honestly. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, David, and God bless all you students out there. God bless you and good luck. All my love. Thank you.
Thanks, Robyn. Okay, cheerio.
Bye.